Let's move on to our final session for today. I am delighted to be joined by Don Jackson, who is going to discuss how you can prepare for the new paradigm shift in our continuous testing world. Welcome, Don. Stage is yours.
Well, thanks, Nina. As Nina said, hello. My name is Don Jackson. I'm a chief technologist here at Micro Focus in our application delivery management portfolio. Thanks for joining the session to go around our point of view around the shift culture that's permeating our industry. You may have heard of shift left or shift right being essential to successfully preventing defect slippage in today's application development landscape. In fact, the 2021-2022 World Quality Report cites that 55% of respondents stated that they needed to shift left more, and 53% of the respondents stated that they needed to shift right more. Our session today is going to focus on the Micro Focus point of view, that we need to shift everywhere, both left and right, but not abandon the lessons that we've learned so far in testing. So gone are the days of being able to toss the application over the fence to QA once you finish coding. The speed of business is just too fast to allow for the delays introduced through feedback being sent days to weeks after the developer finished the code. The human mind has such a challenge context switching from what is currently in the forefront to what was being worked on that long ago. And that delay is further compounded by having to ramp back up on what the developer did prior to the commit. Now, we in IT have provided a solution to this, and that's delivering software through a DevOps pipeline. But what is a DevOps pipeline? A DevOps pipeline can be visualized through a water pipeline. There are gates represented by the valves at different points, and if a failure occurs, represented by the production feedback at the bottom. That feedback is sent back to the submitter, which is usually the developer, and that's sent back immediately to reduce the likelihood of context switching delays. The submitter then resolves the failure, then resubmits into the pipeline. When the submission occurs, it should be stored in a source code repository. That source code repository should version the changes, including submitter comments, and provide collision detection. And the collision, what I mean by that is if multiple changes against the same source need to be integrated from multiple submitters. And then it should also provide merging capabilities to handle those collisions. Once the source has no collisions left, the build system will take over and start executing the pipeline steps. And this would be called continuous integration. The first step is to compile the source to create artifacts, like a jar file or a WAR file for Java code, and then to store those artifacts in an artifact repository. Once the artifacts are copied to the artifact repository, which provides a central location for all artifacts, the build system then executes unit tests for the testing system. And this is the first part of continuous testing. Assuming that the unit tests pass, the build system then engages the provisioning and deployment solutions to stand up the next pre-production environment and then deploy those artifacts to that environment. And this is called continuous delivery. Once the environment is up and running the new artifacts, the testing system then executes the appropriate automated tests for that environment. And that is another part of continuous testing. The build systems then has the provisioning system deprovision that environment. And those last three steps are repeated for each environment or type of testing that needs to be done, whether that's integration testing, system testing, performance testing, or some other kind of testing that you need to do. Now, once all of the testing has completed successfully, the build system then moves the artifacts into production, including any steps necessary to start leveraging those new artifacts. Now, that might be something like as simple as a JVM restart, maybe a full system restart, or maybe just cache cleanup. And that would be called continuous deployment. As part of that deployment, the continuous monitoring, the operations and monitoring artifacts, the scripts or configurations or alerts are deployed and activated. And these frankly, they should have been included in the lower environments as well, which would make up continuous monitoring. So now that we've set the stage for what is a DevOps pipeline, let's drill into testing, which is what we're here to talk about with the shift culture. We talked earlier about the reason why we can't just throw stuff over the fence to QA, but that doesn't mean that the QA persona is no longer needed. The QA person provides a critical and a different way of thinking to how to test a solution. QA has this destructive mindset. They are the resource who will come up with and execute, hopefully in an automated way, the majority of the negative test scenarios for an artifact. A good example might be to talk about a quantity field on a shopping application. A positive test, which should be handled in unit testing, would be to test the boundaries of that field. Let's say in our example that it's a 2-digit field. The data scenarios covered by the positive test would be the lowest boundary, which is the number 1, the highest boundary, which would be 99, and some random value in the middle. And this would satisfy the unit test or the positive test. The QA person, however, would come up with negative testing data scenarios, like, for example, trying to test for the quantity of 0, or maybe -1, or maybe trying to paste in 99 billion, or maybe pasting in a hashtag or a Cyrillic symbol, or maybe a Chinese character, or maybe an emoji that they had in their buffer. All things that may happen in production when you deal with a lot of cut and paste in our social media world that we live in today. Now, while QA provides this necessary and valuable insight, there are definite limitations to what a QA person can do. Normally, QA is doing what we call black box testing, meaning that they have no visibility into the inner workings of the artifact and thus can't ensure proper code coverage. Furthermore, QA is typically engaged, like we talked about earlier, later in the cycle, which increases the time for failure feedback. This is why we need to include the dev tester, or the SDET, software development engineer and test, or the developer into the testing. The dev tester should be focusing on unit level testing. And because they are the ones typically writing the code, this will be done in a manner doing what we call white box testing, meaning that they can validate the inner workings of that artifact, meaning all of the logic permutations that code goes through. They also get the benefit of immediate feedback. So there's no delay or context switching problems like we talked about earlier as well. Now, this graphic that I've put up on the screen here helps you visualize the way shift left and shift right are viewed, with the developer testing being as far left as possible. Now, you might also visualize why this is called shift left by thinking about the positioning of activities on a Gantt chart, with the development activities happening much earlier or left in the Gantt chart. While the developer, they understand the code, they can ensure adequate code coverage, and they get the fastest feedback by creating and executing tests themselves, neither development nor QA has the intimate knowledge of how to run the business utilizing that artifact. This is why it's crucial to also shift right your testing by engaging the business analysts, or you may call them your domain experts, or maybe even the business in that testing. And that testing that they do should also be contributing to the test automation effort. Now, frankly, this persona is the person who understands the business processes, essentially why that artifact is being built or modified, and how that artifact will be leveraged to run their business. They know the flow through the business and understand why it's critical to keeping the business going, and what workflow will be executed through the solution, utilizing this artifact that's in question. Now, this persona, though, typically doesn't know how to code, and frankly, can even be scared off from doing work if they're shown code. They might run for the hills. Now, it's critical, though, that their contribution towards testing doesn't require coding skills, yet still contributes towards automation. Now, when you think of this persona, you can think of a banker at a bank. They have little to no technical knowledge, but their contribution of the business knowledge into the test automation is crucial to getting as close to zero defect slippage as possible. Now, we at Micro Focus, we provide solutions to all three of these personas. In the functional test automation space for the QA or central persona, we provide a solution called UFT1. This solution is infused with our AI model, providing computer vision and OCR, or optical character recognition, capabilities to the QA persona, enabling faster scripting and more resilient tests than properties-based scripting that we've been doing for the past 20 plus years. Essentially, computer vision identifies the objects on the screen the same way that a human does, by their visual characteristics rather than the underlying object properties. Now, this screenshot that I brought up on the screen shows the AI inspection window, where the computer vision has identified multiple objects and text blocks on the screen that can be acted against. For the developer, we provide UFT Developer. UFT Developer is also infused with that AI model, but is delivered instead via libraries directly in the developer's IDE, or integrated development environment. In this case, I'm displaying on the screen IntelliJ, which happens to be my IDE of choice. But since these libraries since this solution is delivered as libraries, they could be imported and leveraged in any IDE that supports Java, JavaScript, or C#. However, if you're using Visual Studio, Eclipse, IntelliJ, the Spring Tools Suite, the JBoss Developer Studio, the CodeReady Developer Studio, or the Android Studio, you also get the benefit of the UFT Developer menu item, which you probably can't see on the screen, but it's up there. And that menu item provides wizards to help the developers be even more efficient in their test creation and maintenance. UFT Developer also includes a local version of service virtualization at no additional cost for the developers to leverage, and that enables them to test and develop their artifacts when other components in the solution set just aren't available. For the business analyst, we provide a product called UFT Codeless, which is truly a codeless solution as opposed to code suppressed like some of our competitors. And it leverages NLP, or natural language processing. And it also comes with our newly released model-based testing solution. As you can see on the screen, this quote-unquote script is in near plain English. No business analyst should be scared of a step that says something like click the profile, or click the speaker's text, or type in the value of the username into the username field. This also leverages that same AI model. But when we talk about this AI model, what are we really talking about? So I find it's helpful to look at this from three different ways. Computer vision, that I talked about earlier, identifies objects the same way a human does. So you can think of it kind of like the eyes on the screen, on the screen. So when you talk about how do we identify it, no person here would know what the class is of the shopping cart that's on the screen. They would visually look at it because they would think about it the same way that they have their neural network set up, their synapses set up of a shopping cart in real life. And that shopping cart kind of looks like a half of a hexagon, with maybe a line underneath it representing the shelf underneath the basket, maybe two dots underneath that representing the wheels, and a squiggly line to the side representing the handle. All of those visual characteristics help you and me identify it. And that's what computer vision provides to the UFT family of products. But once you find the item on the screen, then you have to interact and manipulate that object in a natural manner. So great examples for that might be the search icon, which kind of looks like a magnifying glass. We all know, because of how search icons work, that you click the search icon, the magnifying glass, and you expect a pop-up box to show up that's a text box. You type in what you want to search for, and then maybe you click the magnifying glass again or hit enter. That's how you natively or naturally interact and manipulate that object. And that's what the neural network provides. And then finally, we talked about this, is natural language processing, where you can write those tests in almost plain English using words like click the shopping cart, so that you know what to find on the screen. It knows what to find on the screen and what to do with it. Just like in the functional test automation space, we also cater to all three personas in the performance testing space. For that central, the QA or the performance engineering persona, we provide LoadRunner Professional for the smaller project-based initiatives. When the initiative is larger or enterprise-wide, we provide LoadRunner Enterprise, which extends those LoadRunner Professional capabilities by including asset sharing and trend reporting. The asset sharing allows you to share those lab resources like the load generators or the controllers or the licenses themselves, and all of those resources, you can schedule and reserve them. Now, trend reporting provides a mechanism to analyze not just the current run, but how that run compares to previous runs to provide that larger picture of whether the overall performance is improving or degrading from run to run. We also provide LoadRunner Cloud, where our SaaS provides all of the necessary infrastructure for executing the tests at runtime in our cloud. For the developer, we have a relatively new solution called LoadRunner Developer. It's free, and it can run up to 50 virtual users within the developer's IDE. It can also run those in LoadRunner Cloud directly from the IDE with configuration, and can execute in conjunction with UFT Developer so that the developer can understand the impact of injected load on the actual end user. Additionally, since they all co-reside on the IDE, you can leverage the service virtualization capabilities included with UFT Developer when you're doing your LoadRunner developer work, so that you can do performance and load testing even when other parts of the solution aren't available. Maybe they haven't even been built yet. As you can see from the screenshot, we also leverage a Grafana analysis dashboard during the run as well, which is included with LoadRunner Developer. For the business analyst, we have a protocol called TrueClient that allows the business persona to contribute to performance testing as well. As you can see, the script is once again displayed in near plain English and allows most of the business analysts to create scripts that are between 80 and 95% complete. And then they hand those scripts off for final polish to that central performance engineering persona. Once again, everyone should be contributing to the performance as well. Now let's drill back out and look at the DevOps pipeline. You've probably read multiple articles about DevOps from multiple sources, including consulting firms. Most of those articles extol the virtues of open source and suggest that you should definitely leverage open source solutions since they're quote unquote free. Now, each box has multiple solutions in it that are viewed as open source. The challenge, though, that's being faced in our industry is that this quote unquote free is only talking about the licensing cost and not the total cost of ownership. These quote unquote free solutions frequently require significant human labor investment in order to successfully accomplish the task or the task that tool is being asked to do. So let's take Selenium, for example. It requires detailed coding knowledge, intimate understanding of the object properties within the DOM or the document object model of your application, and it only works with web. And its locators often rely on CSS or the XPath. Now, many technologies, many development frameworks will cause the CSS and or the XPath to change with each build of the artifact. And that causes what we call brittle test automation scripts because they frequently break with each build. Furthermore, the scripts are so technical that they're difficult to read and really only cater to one of those three personas that we talked about. Now, as with all open source solutions, when, not if, but when you run into a problem, you have to rely on the open source community for a resolution. If the problem is unique to your environment, you're on your own to figure out how to resolve that problem. If the community hasn't encountered your technology before, you're also on your own. Excuse me. Now, when you deal with a COTS or commercially available off-the-shelf solution like the Micro Focus solutions, you're backed not only by a robust user community like you are with open source, but you have a support and R&D organization who can help you when you face your challenges and provide a much faster mean time to resolution of that challenge. And frankly, we have deeper and broader technology support. As with the case of Selenium, since you're limiting the personas that contribute to automation, you're also exposing yourself to the increased risk of defect slippage because you haven't accounted for those other personas and their thorough process knowledge and their business knowledge. But let's assume for a second that you've done all of the necessary human labor investment and your pipeline is running smoothly and effectively utilizing all of these open source tools. My question to you would be then, how do you make informed decisions about what's going on within that pipeline? We here at Micro Focus, we provide solutions for each of these phases of the DevOps pipeline. While we wouldn't be opposed to a rip and replace approach to your pipeline, we focus more on plugging the gaps of your pipeline as they exist today, while we augment the return on your investment where you don't have gaps. So, for example, if you tell us you already have a team of Jenkins experts who have built and are maintaining Jenkins jobs and pipelines as the build system, that's great. Continue to do so. And maybe we can plug Jenkins into Value Edge to increase the value that you're getting. Or maybe you need to plug the Git repository gap that allows developers to overwrite previous developers' comments without history. We could lay Pulse Uno on top of Git to provide that immutable history while preserving the current way of working. Or maybe you aren't performing static code analysis and we can plug that gap with Fortify. Or maybe you're using your build system to also do deployment with lots of scripting, which requires lots of maintenance. We could help you by digitizing those scripts with deployment automation and stop forcing your build system to do something it wasn't purpose-built to do. But there's still a challenge that we need to address. There's actually a fourth persona that we haven't talked about, and that persona is your leadership or management. They need to be able to make informed investment and strategic decisions based on the information in the entire pipeline across all of your different tooling. You're not going to have your director or vice president scraping through Jenkins logs trying to determine what's going on within the pipeline. And frankly, that's where Value Edge comes in. Value Edge gathers or can provide the information from across all of your DevOps pipeline tools, whether they're micro-focused solutions, open source solutions, or from other vendors, and provide you with AI-driven reporting and dashboarding so that your leadership can make insight-driven business decisions, driving your DevOps pipeline to the achievement of its goals, which should be delivering software at the speed of business, but with quality. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Nina so that we can talk about questions. Nina?
Here I am, Don. Thank you so much for this insightful overview. Yes, there are some questions. Let's start with a question regarding AI. When you talk about AI, where does it store the object properties?
Well, it's a great question, Nina. In actuality, it doesn't store the object properties. So it's not actually storing anything about the object other than the information referenced in the script, which, as you saw, might be something like shopping cart. And what it does is it finds those objects using those visual characteristics I talked about. And because it's using those visual characteristics, it doesn't matter what platform or development framework was used to display that or create that object. Those visual characteristics are present, and the AI, the computer vision that we talked about, can find that object. So that could be in iOS or Android or a desktop, meaning you could have one script that goes across all of those.
Thank you. Another question regarding codeless. You mentioned UFT codeless and that it is part of model-based testing. Is this new?
That's an interesting question. So the answer is yes and no. So UFT codeless has been in what we call technical preview and has been delivered as part of UFT 1 for a while now. So it's not really new. However, it's now been officially released, or we call it GA in the software world, or generally available. And it comes with our new product, model-based testing. Now, in MBT, model-based testing, you can design your tests through a graphical user interface, or import existing business process diagrams that you might have written that are from using another tool, something like maybe an Eris, for example, that can export in a BPMN, which stands for Business Process Modeling Notation format. And you underpin each of the units with automation. And that, like I said, UFT codeless comes with that to provide that automation engine for you, or you could use UFT 1. Then you analyze those diagrams to do what we call a path analysis. And that tells you how many paths you have through your diagram. And then you choose to generate a test. And tests, it changes the paradigm here. It's really a paradigm shift where tests now become disposable artifacts that get regenerated each time that you update the model. Then you can also leverage the analytics engine inside of MBT to determine what you should test, which one should have a higher priority to test within all of the units that included in that path. And then you have the test runner execute those tests using Jenkins as your CI. Now, I give you a very brief overview there, kind of UFT codeless and MBT, but you might want to, if you want to learn more, get in touch with your local sales team, and they can come in and have a more in-depth conversation and help determine whether or not MBT and UFT codeless would be a help for you in your particular environment.
Thank you, Don. Another question. We have multiple CI tools in different groups. Jenkins in one, Azure DevOps in another, and others elsewhere. Will Value Edge help me?
Absolutely. So Value Edge can centralize and collate and lay on that AI-infused analytics for your multiple CI tools in a single and well-defined user interface. And that we talked about during the session, increasing the value of what you're already doing. So this is a great example of that, of extending the value and increasing your return on your investment. And it gives you, we also deliver as part of Value Edge, if you go with the entire suite, a common CI tool as well, where you could potentially use that CI tool that we deliver as part of Value Edge for new ones, and move to the point where if you're using the advantage of using a common CI tool is that your human resources, your people on your programs or your initiatives or products, however you label, what your software development lifecycle is, or application lifecycle is, those people now become more portable so that they can shift from one initiative to another without having to learn a new one. There may be some business reason that you have for wanting to maintain separate CI tools, depending on what it's individually delivering for you, but we support both approaches with Value Edge, and certainly can help you analyze your waste and the value of your flow process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Then during the presentation, you mentioned that business analysts can take part into the performance validation activities. So what's the name of the solution that you mentioned?
So it's a scripting protocol that we have in the performance space called True Client, and it displays, like I said, it displays the essentially your business analyst would be able to record their business process using True Client, and it would create that business process in a near plain English display, so they could go back and make sure that they did the steps that they wanted to do in there, and be able to play it back and help with that. Then those scripts that get generated can be handed off, and depending on whether you're using LoadRunner Enterprise or LoadRunner Cloud or LoadRunner Professional, can be handed off in a different method to that central persona for final polish. Because there may be something that, some session variable that True Client didn't automatically handle that they have to go back and tweak to make sure it handles that. But most of the time, what we see is those scripts are between 80 and 95% complete just by what the business analyst did.
Thank you, Don. One final question. I see we reach the top of the hour. What do you mean when you talk about Jenkins shouldn't be doing deployment activities?
Yeah, so I have this conversation a lot with people about what is a CI tool, what is a continuous integration tool actually built to do, right? The challenge is because you can do scripting in CI tools like Jenkins, is that people look at that and say, well, I can script just about anything I want to do. So I'm going to make my CI tool do deployments as well, which it absolutely can do. The challenge is that requires a lot of scripting, and scripts require a lot of maintenance, because as environments change, as maybe if you're using GCP, Google Cloud Platform, and they make a change to their REST API call of how you spin up the environment, now you have to go change your script. Whereas if you use a deployment tool specifically built for that, like our deployment automation solution, we handle those types of things of handling those API calls and provide those in an icon-driven manner so that you can just leverage that. So it's kind of like that analogy of square peg, round hole. You're forcing that square peg of deployment into the round hole of continuous integration. Not that you can't do that, you certainly can, but I would rather free up my Jenkins experts to build more pipelines and to help me do more continuous integration work, rather than having them to write and maintain a bunch of deployment scripts, when there's tools out there, frankly, like deployment automation, that can digitize that and make it much easier and much faster and more resilient to change by leveraging a tool purpose-built for deployment. So that's what I was talking about there.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yep.
I think we are out of time for questions. Thank you so much, Don.
Yeah.
And thanks to everyone who submitted questions.
Get social with us. Twitter, LinkedIn, Get Social, Micro Focus Universe.